G'day, I'm Peter Fritz and welcome back to Landscape Photography in 3 minutes, a series that I'm running in July 2022 with simple tips on how to improve your landscape photography. This is episode number 18 where I'm going to share 5 tips to help you find at least 5 photos in the one spot without even moving your tripod. And the first tip is a very simple one. Turn around, look behind you, especially if you're talking early morning or late afternoon where the light is constantly changing. Turn around and look behind you and you might well find there are photo opportunities right where you just came from. The second one is to try extreme focal length differences. Try something ultra wide, try something long. Try to zoom into specific elements of the scene. Try to include a lot more in the scene than what you otherwise are. The third tip, which is quite similar to trying different focal lengths, is to switch your camera into portrait orientation and do a pano. Take half a dozen shots swinging from left to right and then try stitching them together in Photoshop or Lightroom. You may well end up with a very different perspective. And you can try this at different focal lengths too. Rather than doing what may seem obvious and putting on a wide lens and then sweeping around and getting a really wide vista, try putting on something like a standard lens, something more like a 50, and then try a pano with that. It's a very interesting combination of the sort of human perspective of a 50mm lens and the wide reach or breadth of a wide lens. So try that and see what sort of results you get. Tip number 4 is to get down very low and experiment with blurring foreground or background and focusing on elements that are much closer to you or lower down, or altering the relationship between what you're photographing in the midground or the background and what appears in the foreground. Just shifting your position vertically can make a huge difference to the composition that you have, like this photo here behind me. When I clambered up on a roadside hill and photographed that tree, it was quite interesting. It's a gnarly looking tree. I like the look of it. It was sort of late afternoon. It was fairly harsh light and it worked. But then when I got down lower and blurred out my foreground, which was these dry grasses, I ended up with a much more dramatic image. So this is a really good tip to try in lots of different situations. Just get down really low, see what's in the foreground and either focus on that or use that as a way to lead the eye into your midground or background by blurring out what's in the foreground. As an aside with that, you could also try, if you're getting down low, try shooting some macro as well, getting in really close on whatever is in your foreground. Now that could be dry, cracked earth, it could be the root system of a tree, it could be fallen leaves, it could be wildflowers. There's all sorts of stuff that you can photograph. Landscape photography doesn't have to be about the grand vista and the big subjects all the time. Oftentimes, landscape photography is best communicated, or the story is best communicated by focusing on something very small, something in your immediate foreground, something close to your feet. It's kind of like a really intimate environmental story that you're telling. Try long exposures if there is any movement present in your subject. Now that could be the clouds sweeping overhead, it could be the grasses moving in the breeze, it could be trees moving in the breeze. If you can lock onto something which isn't moving, but then have other elements of your scene like water or grasses or leaves or clouds moving, then you can end up with a really interesting juxtaposition between activity or action and your subject. I've done this a few times with trees where I've had a dead tree in amongst live trees and it's blustery and windy and the live trees are moving around in the wind, but the dead tree is stationary, and that looks quite unique. Same with water, focusing on something in my subject that isn't moving, but I've got leaves and water moving in the scene, and that creates an interesting juxtaposition as well. So look for movement in your subjects, leaves, clouds, water, grasses, that kind of thing, and try a long exposure. You might need to use a polarizing filter to cut out the amount of light coming through the lens to be able to get that shutter speed down nice and low, even if you're shooting at your minimum ISO and you've got your aperture closed down to f16 or f22. Don't go beyond that because it tends to be rubbish after that. And still not have a slow enough shutter speed, so you might need to use something like a polarizing filter to cut out a couple of stops of light. And if that's not enough, you might need a neutral density filter. I recommend a variable ND filter just so that you can adjust the amount of light that you're actually blocking coming in through the lens to the sensor. Anyway, that's it. 5 tips on how to get interesting photos in the one spot without changing your position other than swinging around or looking below you. Hopefully it was useful. If it was, please do give it a thumbs up. It actually helps. Subscribe if you haven't already. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. See ya. For more on this subject, just click here.